just need the speaker to be mic'd. Yeah, so when we get into the speaker.
Okay. Oh, that's good. I'll mention that in the process.
Good morning. It's great to see those of you who I met in Renton back again. For the new people, I'm Lori Anderson, the Rules Coordinator for the Department of Early Learning. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy lives to give up your weekend and come and work on this very important project with us. We really appreciate it. We know that you are committed and that you're all sacrificing your time, and that helps to prove to us that you've given us this commitment. We are thrilled. So those of you who were in Renton, and for the new people, I'll be facilitating this weekend. I have co-facilitators, Hallie, who you met in Renton, and Zane, who is new, and Tina, who was in Renton, will be joining us this afternoon. And all three will be here through the weekend with us. We have Luba and Debbie, who are kind of our project coordinators. Debbie, if in the back, if you raise your hand. If you need something throughout the weekend that isn't readily available to you, then those are the people to talk to, or you can grab the three of us and let us know what you need, and we'll try to accommodate those needs. We have bathrooms on this floor. When you walk out the door, you walked in. There's bathrooms to your left, and there's bathrooms to your right. And I want to remind everybody that we are video recording, and if you didn't sign in when you came in, you need to sign in both to to give your authorization that it's okay if you appear in the video, and number two, it's part of our meal count, so the real important reason you need to sign in if you're going to want to be eating lunch with us. We'll be following the agenda that you picked up when you walked in. And if you didn't get one, there's plenty of more out there. We do have some people who signed up to come, just public members who are interested in the process. We're expecting a few today. I imagine that they'll be here for the afternoon's part, which is when we get down to the negotiations. This morning, we're going to be going over the code of conduct and the guiding principles that you all developed in Renton, and making sure we're still all in agreement. We'll be explaining to you how the negotiation process will flow. We're going to remind everybody about the interest-based negotiation principles that we went over last month. We'll talk about cultural competency. We're gonna synthesize, Zane and Hallie will synthesize the public comments that came in that were forwarded to all of you earlier in the week. Luba will be talking about the process that's gone on so far and the evolution of these draft rules, how we got from the start to where we are today. And then there will be another discussion about the weights. So, at this time, I'd like to, before we dive into all of that, I'd like to just go around the room and ask each team leader to introduce those members who are with you here today. And we'll start with Katie. And
Am I introducing my team? Yes, please. Sorry, I just chewing. Okay, so we are the Head Start ECAP Early Head Start team. I'm Katie Warren with the Washington State Association of Head Start and ECAP. And we have Antonio Daniel down there from Inspire, Susie Sandoval, also from Inspire, and Yolanda Arellano from Inspire. Vanessa is from the Head Start Training and Technical Assistance contractor, which helps all of our programs. Debbie Hood is with Lewis County Head Start and ECAP. And Pam Grigsby Jones is with ESD 113 in Olympia and surrounding counties. And Susan Yang is from Denise Louie Education Center in Seattle.
Thank you, Katie, and welcome to all of you. Is Allison here in the room? Okay. And next we have the family home providers and Marie or Yolanda. No, I'm sorry, not Yolanda. Guadalupe? Which one of you would like to do the honors?
Good morning. I'm Marie Keller. I'm a family child care provider from Everett. I'm the chapter president for the union. And we have an incredible team that's almost all here. Chris Price, Ann, Sabah, Faisa, Sandra, and Guadalupe, a couple on their way, and Carol Gibbs. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Marie, and welcome to you all. And here we have the Dell licensing team and Judy.
I am Judy Bonkelman. I am the licensing monitor and risk management coordinator, but we have Candy Latimer, who is a supervisor out of Everett, Brenda Martinez, who's the RA up north, Lacion Brogan, who is a licenser out of Vancouver, Jessica, who is a licenser out of Olympia, Yvonne Lewis, who is a health specialist based out of Yakima, Eva Freemuth is a licenser based out of Wenatchee. Debbie Groff is working for the, okay, what's your team? Early Start Act team, thank you. Karen Christensen is a supervisor out of Spokane, and Travis Hansen is our statewide administrator.
Thank you, Judy, and welcome to you all. And here we have the parents, and Cherie, who we met in Renton, will introduce her team. Sorry, Cherise.
Yeah, Charisse. So I am Charisse. I am a parent. This is Krista with Child Care Aware. This is Carolyn, parent. Gabby, parent. Christina, parent. Kevin, parent. And Elliot, newly along. From Child Care Aware. And we have another parent that just made it in. This is Christiana.
Perfect timing. Thank you, Cherise. Welcome to you all. And here we have the centers team. And Dan will introduce.
Dan from Thrive Washington. I'm actually going to pass the mic down and have folks say just your name and where you're from.
I'm Kara Bauer, and I'm with Little Scholars in Spokane, Washington.
I'm Candy Whitaker from Walla Walla, the ARC Day School.
Nicole Sohn, Journey Discovery Center in Spokane, Washington.
Sherry Hilton, Lacey Learning Center and DuPont Learning Center.
Deetra Miller with Catholic Charities and St. Anne's, also in Spokane.
Gracie Martinez with the president of the Pacific Northwest Montessori Association and Three Tree Montessori School.
Thank you, and welcome to you all. And to Dan's right, we've got Jess, who's also with Thrive. So at this point, we'll move on to following our agenda. In Renton, we looked at the protocols that had been drafted, and the group made a change to one of the sections, the Code of Conduct section. So we are going to take this time to review the Code of Conduct again. We have it on a poster here in the middle of the room that we'll be moving around at different times so that it's different visibly to different people at different times. But the elements of the Code of Conduct were that we're going to negotiate in good faith with fidelity to the process. We're going to work to find common ground through negotiation. We're going to encourage and support an inclusive public negotiation process. We're going to be truthful. We're going to respect each other and each other's opinions. We're going to limit side conversations. We're going to tolerate dissent. We will be courageous, be accountable, and attend scheduled meetings and be punctual. We will prepare for scheduled meetings by reading the draft rules to be discussed before the start of the meeting. We're going to turn off our cell phones and other distractions during the meetings, and we're going to follow these protocols. So I'd like to remind you all that the protocols and the code of conduct are what I call a living document. We'll review them periodically throughout our summer together. That you all are in charge of these negotiations as well as this process. So if there's something that needs to be changed about the process or the code of conduct, you'll all talk to your team leader, and then the team leader will bring it to make me aware of the request to change, and then we'll take it back to the group and decide if we want to make that change or not. So starting off today, this is the code of conduct that we're going to follow. And I'll just ask everybody now that to just reaffirm that we're going to follow that code of conduct. And if there's anybody who has an issue with any of these things, now is your chance to bring it up. So, awesome. We're reaffirmed. Yay.
Thank you very much, Lori. My name is Zane Wyrick with Public Consulting Group. Yes, I'm a little Southern. Sorry, guys. To start out with, just on that affirmation with the code of conduct, could everybody, we're going to talk about this here in a little bit, but our way of signaling consensus for right now, could everybody hold up 5 fingers on the code of conduct? I want full consensus. Wonderful. All right, that's the code of conduct. We're all in agreement there for now. Again, that is a living document. So to talk through the negotiated rulemaking guiding principles and core values, talked about them last time, but just we're going to go through each one, and I want to do just the same thing, 5 fingers for each one. So first one up here, support children and families. Support children and families' quality, sustainability, child-family outcomes. The licensing regulations support children and families by creating an environment that promotes high-quality care and positive child and family outcomes. 5 fingers. Looks good. Collaboration, partnership, licensors, providers, families. Parents are partners and inspire. The licensing regulations inspire collaboration and partnership. 5 fingers. Beautiful. Professionalism, self-accountability. The licensing regulations support the professionalism of the field. 5 fingers. Wonderful. Consistency, knowledge. The licensing regulations are consistently interpreted and monitored, and I can't read that. And monitored and are informed by best practice. Wonderful. Sustainability and affordability. The implementation of the licensing regulations will be sustainable for child care providers. Transparency, clarity, access, and brevity. The licensing regulations are clear and as brief as possible because they are accountable, accessible. Providers are knowledgeable of the regulations. And finally, support providers and individually and flexible. The licensing regulations set equitable standards and acknowledge diversity and individuality of programming. Last one. All right. Could everybody please take a stand up? Got to get the blood moving early in the morning. All right. So last one on code of conduct, 5 fingers. All right, hands down. Guiding principles and core values, 5 fingers. Beautiful. All right, you can sit back down. Thanks.
Great job. And that was a graphic that we created that came out of the discussion that happened in Renton. And so many of you were in that discussion, but if you weren't in that discussion, that's really where the guiding principles came from. And so those were the values and the principles that people in this room talked about and came to a consensus on. And at the center of that was really the child safety and health. So that's why we're here, to negotiate so that kids are safe and kids are healthy in our care. So right now we're going to talk briefly about the negotiation process, so what we're actually going to be doing this weekend. And this graphic is really a synthesis of what is in the protocol. So everybody should have the protocol in their binders, but this is just a visual way to kind of see what's happening. So this weekend, when it's coming time for negotiation, our facilitator is going to read the regulation that's to be negotiated. So we'll cover certain topics on certain days. I think tomorrow's professional development, today is intent and authority, child outcomes, and family engagement. But the facilitator first is going to read the regulation so that we all know what we are negotiating. Then it's going to be time for the negotiation team leads. So we just heard the team leads introduce everybody. The team lead is going to present their team's position to this larger group. And when we do that, we're going to give the team lead the microphone, not only so that everybody in this room can hear what they're saying, but also, since we are video recording, so that we have an accurate account of what was said. So the team lead will present their team's position, and then we will open it up for some negotiation. Now, if there's something that you would like to say, or you think the team leader needs to reemphasize, or something that comes up that you want to make sure is heard in this forum, the team leader, next to our little tents that say what the teams are, there is a little bouquet of pinwheels. So there should be 10 pinwheels in each bouquet. So each team has a bunch of pinwheels. And if somebody on that team decides, you know what, there's something that needs to be said, I feel like we need to ask an expert, or I want to make sure the team lead points this out, you're going to raise your pinwheel so that your team lead knows that there's something that you want to contribute. It will be the team lead's responsibility to call on you and to ask you to speak. And really, we just want to do that so that everybody can be heard, because if everybody starts talking, it's going to be really difficult for anybody to feel like their perspective is being heard, and then also just for us to actually get to hear you. So your team lead is responsible for those pinwheels. They can pass them out, set them out on the table, but if you have something that you want to contribute or think your team lead needs to say again, raise that pinwheel, wave it so your team lead sees you, and your team lead will ask you to speak. And then we'll also hand you the microphone so that everybody can hear what you're saying. If during the negotiation process, we decide that, you know what, the negotiation is kind of stalling in this format, or there's, you know, two teams that just really have strong opinions and we want to send it to a resolution team so that they can speak in a smaller group or have a breakout setting. We do have some breakout rooms. And so if that happens, then, you know, if the regulation needs editing, clarification, or further negotiation, which is what we say here, then we'll ask the resolution team, so representatives from each group, to step out to our breakout room where they can continue the conversation about that regulation. When they come back in, we'll ask them to share as soon as the large group has finished negotiating that current regulation. So we're not going to interrupt exactly at that moment the regulation team is ready to speak. We'll wait until we've resolved the topic that we're talking about, and then we'll ask the resolution group to share with us their proposal. And the same goes for our TA group. So if there is another regulation that really needs to be seen, and the protocol talks about looking through the lens of racial equity or cultural humility, that's what the technical assistance team is going to look through. And so if you have questions about that, again, we'll refer you back to the protocol. But we also have a breakout room for that group, and it will follow the same process. So here in this graphic on this end, it just says that negotiations will continue. So if a resolution group steps out, a TA group steps out, the conversation is going to continue in this room. So we just want everybody to be aware of that. And when those teams or subgroups are ready to present, they'll come back in, and we'll have them present as soon as we've finished our conversation. And then finally, on the far right-hand side, consensus is reached when all teams indicate acceptance on our fist to 5, and we're going to talk about that protocol in just a minute. But we We have a graphic of it down here, which will kind of spin around so everybody can see it throughout the morning. And if a consensus cannot be reached on a topic, or the resolution group comes back and they just still don't have any kind of resolution that they can propose to us, then we can decide to table that regulation, either to talk about at the end of the weekend, or if needed, we do have that negotiation weekend in September reserved for some of those regulations that, you know what, let's take some time, we need to think about it, and we'll come back to it again at another point. I'm going to hand the mic off to Zane as he talks about what the negotiation process will look like. Do we have a question? Okay.
Will the rule that's being negotiated be on the screen? That's my first question. And my second question is, if while the breakout team is broken out, if they're needed again for the rule that continued to be talked about in here, what happens?
Bring it over to Lori.
Thanks, Kathy. Those are good questions to clarify. So the first one, yes, the rule will be on the screen. Some of them are, you know, you have to scroll through a few panes to see the entire rule, but those we'll ask you all, do you want to break those up in sections, smaller bites, so that it probably will be all on the screen. And the other question, when the team leads mobilize one of those subgroups and they go off to do their work in the breakout session, in this room, we will not continue talking about the rule that they are working on. The big group will move on down the line and work on another rule. Oh, yeah. Sure. So it's going to be up to the teams to decide. Do you want that resolution group? Because there's, I think, we designed it so that there would be at least 2 people from each team that go off on the resolution to do the resolution or super negotiating. So you can keep those 10 intact and have them work on just the list and get through, you know, one by one. Or if you want to have maybe half of them work on this particular section and the other half work on this particular section, we can do that. And so you guys should be thinking about that actually, and maybe talking in your teams when we have a little team time. And then this afternoon is the first time we'll actually get into some negotiations, and we'll ask you, and there probably is something in today's lineup that could go off into a subgroup. There's probably only one. So it's going to be up to you guys though. And we'll ask, if we get to the point where we have 2, we'll ask you, do you want to just add them to the lineup that's already being worked on? Or do you want to break up that resolution group into 2 and have them divide and conquer?
Another question?
Just wondering how the prep matrix kind of factors in. If there's things that weren't flagged at all in the prep matrix, are we going to discuss that today as well, or should we have the prep matrix kind of opened up on our computer as we go through? Just wondering how that fits in.
You want to address that one?
Absolutely. So there will be, right after lunch, I believe, the first thing after lunch, for the rules that are going to be negotiated today, those people who, we had a preview session, as you all know, where the different groups shared their perspectives, and there were some suggestions made, and we asked all the other teams, do you agree with that or not? There were some pieces that the participants said, let's take that to the big group. Let's not even talk about whether or not we agreed. Let's just take it to the big group for more discussion. So we're going to go over all of those results today. And absolutely, if there's other things that come up, then when we get into negotiations, those other issues need to come out. And that's where the pinwheels come into play. Anyone who on the team who thinks there needs to be something else that's addressed, they'll raise their pinwheel, and as we go around, the team leads will go orderly through the teams, and the team leads can make sure all their people who have pinwheels raised get to share. Does that answer your question, Dan? Everything's on the table. Yeah. Yeah, the function of that preview session was just to kind of get all the ducks in a row and give everybody a chance coming into this weekend to know, to be able to identify some issues early on, give you all a chance to think about it before you get here. I'm one of those people who, you know, someone can ask me a question and I'll give them an answer right there, but I really need to think about it. I need to have another day or so to think about it, and then I'm going to go back to them and say, I need to amend my answer, please. So for those people, we thought it would be good if you had a little bit of time to think about it ahead of time. And if there wasn't something that came up then today's your chance, or this weekend is your chance to bring up those additional points.
Great. All right, I'm going to hand the mic off to Zane unless there's any other questions about the negotiation process. All right.
Awesome. Thank you, Hallie. So we have an orange up here. We think it's so important we actually put it on one of the foam boards up here as well. We'll turn it around. We want everybody to consider the orange going through all these resolution pieces. So there's a story with the orange, which I'm pretty sure it's been discussed before, but the gist of it is that the mother has $2. They only have one orange, and both the daughters want the orange. So the mother, without consulting both of them, decides to split the orange in half, give one half to the one daughter and orange to the other half to the other. Where in reality, one daughter wanted the peel of the orange to make orange zest cookies, while the other daughter just was hungry and wanted the fruit. So going forward, thinking about how these resolutions should take place, look for those win-win opportunities. Look for that compromise where everybody comes out looking pretty good. That's really about it. Any questions there? All right. Okay. So as we're going through these consensus pieces, talked a little bit about the 5 fingers. Again, it's right down here as well. There's 6 different options you get when we're measuring consensus among everybody. Fist is no way, we're blocking consensus. One is I have major concerns. Oh, excuse me. It should be, sorry guys. It should be, I do have major concerns, but not fully blocking consensus. So blocking consensus, I do have major concerns. I would like to discuss some minor issues. That's 2. 3 is, I'm not in total agreement, but I feel comfortable enough with the language to pass without further discussion. 4 is, I think it's fine, no real problems. 5, great language, best language ever. So as we're going through each, that's how all of us are going to be expressing consensus and how we feel. Yes?
So where it says no, I am blocking, the closed fist, but then the next one is to discuss. But we can still discuss closed fist and one finger, right?
That's an absolute yes, up to 3. I'll let Lori explain that. She's gesturing.
Okay. So if you hold up 3 fingers or less, you're going to be sharing why you're not so pleased.
So you've got 4 ways to talk about certain things, fist to 3 fingers. 4 is moving it along, and 5 is it's fantastic. I have no other questions. Does anybody have any other questions?
I just wanted to point out that 3 says without further discussion.
Thank you. We didn't get this slide edited, I think, after Renton, and I apologize. That was what we had discussed in Renton, and the group decided that 3 fingers would be the start of the discussion. And we did update the protocol and these pieces in that protocol, and that was emailed to y'all earlier this week.
Thank you. So you at least have the tools there. Questions? More questions? Bring them on. Okay. Yo.
Is it only team leads that do the fist, or the whole team does it? And if one person on the team has 3 or below, that's just a process question.
It's the full team. Okay. All right, I'm going to hand it off to Luba.
Morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. It's really great to see you all in the room. It's been a long journey, as many of you know. And we all know that we operate within the mixed delivery system, and it's a very diverse early learning system in our state. And we would like to acknowledge it, and we would like to make sure that diversity is presented in the room, and that's why we have 5 groups of providers and parents and licensing division of the Department of Early Learning who will be directly impacted, but we also have to think about all the diverse communities who will be impacted around the state, and sometimes as a white person, or I may not fully understand what those impacts may bring. I also belong to the immigrant community, but I can think about my community and how it may impact my community, but I may not fully understand how it may impact other communities, what race and ethnicity may play into the whole implementation of the language of the new rules. So it will be important to consistently have this lens, and it's why we ask each group to have expertise in the group. So if some of us may not fully understand it, then you have an expert in the group that you can refer to. But I would like us all kind of ask this question: how it may impact communities of color, how it may impact refugee immigrant communities, how it may impact communities who do not, whose language, first language is not English. Thank you.
Okay, so as another resource that your team leads and you as a team have received are the public comments that have come in through the Dell website. So we just wanted to make sure that as we go into the negotiations, these are really a resource for you so that you have another lens of what the community thinks or what the community feels to consider as you come to the table today. So we just have a quick overview of what those public comments were, and as a kind of process note, as the negotiations go on this summer, we're going to be sending you the public comments that pertain to the topic that we are negotiating at that time. So next month when we do environment, you'll get environment, and then you'll have the same public comments from intent and authority and the topics we're discussing today, along with any additional ones that were added. But these are the ones that we've received thus far around the topics that we're talking about today. And so you can see just briefly some of the things that the community is thinking and feeling and voicing, so that as we come to the table, we can really consider that. So I'm not going to read through each and every one of them for you, but if you did not receive that matrix or had some issues regarding the public comments or questions about how to look through those comments, be sure to talk to your team lead, and the team lead will filter that up to us so that we can get you the information that is going to be the most beneficial and most helpful for you as we go through this process.
So in Renton, we got a request from you to explain in more details how the refinement of the rules been happening. So we do have a poster about it, and as the slide is pretty small, what I will do, I will just go around with the poster and explain what is on it. So as you can imagine, or as you may think about it, there are some rules which are new rules that do not exist right now in current licensing regulations. And there are some rules who are existing rules, and they've been refined. So they've been, beginning looks differently, because if it's a new rule, then we first of all looked at the CCDF requirements. We look for caring for our children, and we got information from there. If it's been an existing rule, and sometimes this existing rule lived in both family home and center regulations, and sometimes particular rule may live only in one of the regulations. So then we had to think about a different setting. If it existed only in one of the settings, that we had to think about how it may impact family home setting, or how it may impact a center setting. And also look at CCDF requirements, and also look at caring for our children, and come up with the language of the rule. And the main focus for us is our goal, and the authority that we've been given by the state, is to focus on the rules from the perspective of children's health and safety and children's development. So we've been focusing on the children. It's not like we've been not thinking about the possible impact to the providers and readiness of the system to implement all the systems that support early learning and implement this particular rule. But again, our main focus is on children's health and safety and development. So this is the first step. The second step, as you all remember, you've been asked to provide input. So there have been community meetings where we collected a lot of input. And this input been kind of drove the second revision of the rules, refinement of the rules. Then, as you remember, there have been a feedback collection of the feedback for the community engagement, and Thrive developed a report based on the feedback process. And it's been another refinement, another version of the rules that came to your attention. And this particular subset of the rules we published in November. And then from November of last year to the May of this year, we've been collecting your comments. And the language that you're looking at right now went through 4 to 5 different revisions. So what you see right now is based on caring for our children, CCDF requirements, and your input. As well as we look at resources as early learning guidelines. Also, State of Washington developed a state plan based on the CCDF requirements. So all of those additional resources been considered. So it's why each of your teams, you have a subset of resources, like a hard copy of the subset of resources, and all of the links been sent to you. So I just would like to illustrate that how refinement of the rules been happening. And as we will go through different content areas, children outcomes, so family engagement, we will be able to kind of showcase for you how it may look like for every rule. So right now, what you see here, during a break time, you will be able to come over. It's a refinement of the children outcome rules. So you will be able to see the transition of the initial language to the current language.
Thank you. So again, we're so thankful that you guys are here, and we know that there's going to be a lot of work going on this weekend. And so if you look at your agenda, you'll see that we have welcomed everybody to the group today, but we also have a little icebreaker planned. And so this weekend, we have planned some short icebreakers, moments where you're going to have an opportunity to stand up, to kind of move a little bit, talk to somebody else around you, because we know that sitting in a room, talking to others and listening to others can take a lot of focus, and sometimes you just need a little bit of a break. So we're going to have just a little bit of a break right now before we go into our presentation about why the weights on these WAC regulations. But I also want to point out that in this room, we also have our table over here on this side that has a lot of just items, some tactile items, some little fidget items. If you're that type of person that, you know what, sitting at this table, I just need something to do with my hands, or I just need to be coloring in this coloring page, we have some of those materials for you. So please feel free to use that table throughout the weekend and really do what you need to do so that you can stay engaged. So right now we're going to ask that you participate in a little icebreaker just so that we can get moving. I know that you guys have been sitting now for about an hour. And so this game, maybe you've played it before, but it's called Stand Up If. So I'm going to read a statement, and if that statement is true for you, then you are going to stand up. And this is just going to be an opportunity, again, to, one, get moving because we've been sitting, but also to get to know some of the people in the room. And then I may ask some of you to share, so be prepared for that. I'm not going to ask everybody to share. I know that not everybody likes sharing, but some of these are kind of fun, and we might want to hear your stories. So are there any questions about the rules to this game? All right, we're ready. I see people over here are very ready. All right, so stand up if you've eaten a Krispy Kreme donut, ever. And how many of you that was today? Awesome. All right, everybody can sit back down. Okay, stand up if you've ever fallen down in public. Yeah. See, everybody does it. It happens to everyone. We're all human. Okay, everybody can sit down. I'm not going to make anybody share about that one. Okay, stand up if this is your first time in Yakima. Awesome. Welcome to Yakima. That's great. Okay, stand up if you've ever built something out of wood. We have very craftsy people. Does anybody want to share what they've built? Oh, see, we had a hand up over here. Okay, what did you build?
She already knows the story. But with being part of Policy Council, we got to go to a National Head Start convention, and they gifted all the parents with an American Girl doll. And with me being a parent, I had to find a creative way, very creative way to be able to buy the accessories. So I had a idea at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, which now my brother says I can't share my ideas at that time, and we built a dollhouse. And I am not a math person, so I got the dimensions, but I did not know how that equated into what it would look like. So I've had to get rid of some of my living room furniture because so I was like, if we're gonna do this, we're gonna really go all in. And it's 3 floors. And we really went all in, and my brother laid down tile for the bathroom, and she has wood floors in the kitchen, and yeah, I have pictures, but yeah, it was a little bananas.
Yes, we may have to see pictures of that later. That's awesome. All right, stand up if you have been to a foreign country. We've got a lot of travelers in the room. Awesome. All right, everybody can sit down, but stand up if you have ever laughed so hard that you cried. Oh, that one makes me happy. All right, everybody can sit back down. Stand up if you have ridden in a limo. Oh, that's a lot. Okay, everybody can sit back down. Stand up if you have met someone famous. Oh, does anybody want to share who they met? Okay. Let's hear.
I was 12 years old, and I went on the ferry to Seattle to meet my grandparents and stay with my grandparents for a while. And they lived right above Pike Place Market. And they told me to go get some ice cream and some flowers. So I went down by myself at 12 to Pike Place Market, and there was this creepy person following me. And so, like every 12-year-old, I took off running, and I ran into literally Ann Wilson while she was shopping down in Pike Place Market. And I about lost my crackers because I love her so much.
That's an amazing story. Okay, stand up if you have ever locked your keys in your car. Yeah, a lot of groans on that one. Okay. Stand up if you have wished at some point that you were a wizard at Hogwarts. Okay, so we have some Harry Potter fans in the room. Great. Okay, stand up if you have a pet that is not a cat or a dog. All right, does anybody want to share what they have? All right.
I have 9 chickens.
Oh, 9 chickens. That's fun. Okay, we'll just do 2 more. Stand up if you have ever been on TV. Oh, a handful, yeah. Ooh, this side of the room. Wow. Okay, and here's one of our last ones. Stand up if you have ever flown in a helicopter. Ooh, you might want to ask those people about their stories later. Awesome. Thank you guys for participating. Really, we just want to take some moments out of the long periods of sitting just to get a little bit of a brain break and then also get to know each other because we are all working for the same purpose. We care about kids. We care about their health and safety. And we care about this field. So thank you guys for being here this morning and for participating and for continuing to participate so positively this weekend. I'm going to hand it over to Sonia.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sonia Stevens. I'm from the Department of Early Learning. My role is a licensing analyst for the Eastern region, so my job is to collect, analyze, and store data, all licensing data specifically. I also had the privilege of working with PCG through the weighted WAC process and supporting them in that data collection as well. So we are going to talk about why the weighted WAC and why it's important. I'm gonna let Tyler, my partner in crime, introduce himself first.
Good morning, my name is Tyler Farmer. I'm on the licensing team here at Dell, and I'm also an attorney, so I helped Sonia with the weighted WAC process, and then also the writing team write this entire brand new chapter. So if you want to boo, do it now. They took the fruit away, so you can't throw that. But we're really excited to be here, and we're going to go through a presentation now about why weights and why the change, and hope to answer a lot of questions. All right, thanks.
Okay, so I know that Tina talked about this in your guys' first meeting a little bit about why we weighted the WAC. So when alignment happened, we decided that this is a really great opportunity to add this extra piece of enforcement methodology that would help us to differentiate the importance of every rule, right? So without weighting the WAC, we are recognizing that all assessments and all regulations carry an equal weight. So anyone in the provider community can recognize this, right? So a licensor comes in and say a child escaping from a fence is given the same importance as a doctor not being listed on their forms, right? We recognize this is a problem, so we took the opportunity to weight these WAC. So what we did is the more weight, the more, oh, I guess it is right here. The more weight, the more likely children will be harmed if that regulation is not followed. Oh, that's this one. We have 2 different computers going here. But first we had to actually recognize what does harm mean, right? So we had to really think about the definition of harm. Direct harm is what we would all first go to, right? It's a first thought, is any injury or illness requiring immediate medical treatment or hospitalization or situation which can immediately negatively affect a child's physical, psychological, or emotional well-being. And we would probably also associate these as those weights that are going to be weighted higher, right? We also have indirect harm. These are situations where noncompliance may not immediately impact children's health and safety. However, they may result in harm with repeat or combination noncompliance. So we went forward with this into our weighting process, which I think was explained last time, right? How we did that through the survey and the focus group work.
And if you can go to the next slide. Oh, I see. All right, goals of the weighted process. Above all, and this was mentioned before, we all share the concern of protecting children from both direct and indirect harm. And keeping that distinction in mind is really going to come up several times during not only today, but probably this weekend and throughout the whole negotiated rulemaking process. Protect children from direct and indirect harm. That's what unites all of us here among all the other rules. We also want to establish a common understanding of risk, so there's no longer different sorts of treatment and responses based on any noncompliance throughout the state. We want providers in the Northwest and the Southwest and the Southeast, all over the state, and attorney generals and licensors all to be on the same page, no matter what. And what we're hoping to achieve by this process, and we feel pretty confident about it, is that we're going to effectively and efficiently identify and address trends and risks to children. We're going to do a much better job of actually getting into the data of how different places are responding to the same type of noncompliance. So being an attorney, let's talk about the law, everybody's favorite part. So this is from a Supreme Court, a Washington State Supreme Court case, and I think it does a really good job of explaining the purpose of the WAC, the Washington Administrative Code. And I won't read from very many slides, but unfortunately we have to do it a couple times this weekend, and this one's really fun. This came out just in January, and it says if a statute is ambiguous, that's the RCW, an agency's promulgated rules, which means the WAC, help our interpretation because they fill in the gaps to the effectuation of a general statutory scheme. Does that not sound like legalese or what? Basically, it means what the WAC does is it fills in the gaps for the RCWs, and that's how the system is designed to work. And if you are more visual, I put together, thank you, I put together a flow chart just to really highlight how the laws work and how they regulate not only ourselves, but how we regulate the industry in general. The Revised Code of Washington is created by the state legislature, where all the legislators in their infinite wisdom get together and write statutes. And what this does is it gives Dell our overarching mission, but it provides minimal detail. It doesn't really guide us on how to do things. That's our job. We go to fill in the gaps with the Washington Administrative Code. And we write that. We, as an executive agency, write the WAC. Our guideposts are it must comply with the RCW. If we do not, it's illegal. And it guides the work with the structural framework of the industry, of the childcare and preschool industry. That's our job with the WAC. Then you get into the minutia, the Dell's internal policies and procedures, and this is the day-to-day that our licensors here are incredibly familiar with, which is very nitty-gritty. And we can ignore that entirely, other than I just wanted to show you sort of the hierarchy and how the laws stack. Yes, should I hand her the microphone? Luba will get you a microphone. Even though people here can hear you, this is being recorded, so asking your question into the microphone gets it recorded on tape as well.
I'm just wondering where our contract rules fit in that hierarchy that you just showed.
And which contract specifically, as far as?
Family child care?
Generally, contracting is done in compliance with the RCWs. It is not going to be in any of the WAC that we discuss in this setting.
So if our contract said something that conflicted with something that's in a WAC, for example, our contract or the WAC would take precedence?
I'm going to defer that question for now, only because it's sort of outside the scope of our presentation at the moment, and we have a pretty tight timeline. However, I'd be happy to talk with you to get more detail about it. But I think that's a good question, and it's really important to understand the structural framework of all these different components. So I apologize, I'm going to have to punt for now, but we can talk in a minute. All right. Going back to the WAC, what we write, what we control, all WACs are important, and this is critical to our new chapter, our new weighted WAC. And there are two distinctions to keep in mind: weighted versus unweighted WACs, and low versus high weighted WACs. So the first distinction, unweighted versus weighted WACs are, in this new chapter, anytime a provider has a duty. So anytime that it says, you must do something or you must not do something as a child care provider, that is going to be weighted. Unweighted WACs are things we must do, DEL, the agency, when we must do something, when we must include something or not include something in a notice, in a procedure, those are unweighted. And that'll help you distinguish when you're looking through the different rules and sections and subsections and subsections. Just keep that distinction in mind. Low weights versus high weights, we really designed this system to capture a lot of different data and a lot of different implications with risk. The lower weights really correspond with noncompliance that captures duration of noncompliance. If somebody is in noncompliance for a long time, the low weights are going to sort of add up. 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 over an amount of time. We're still going to capture that data, and it's going to be very important, versus a very high weight, which is if you do it once, if there's a noncompliance issue that is a very serious direct danger to children, then that's going to be a different approach in how DEL responds. So keep that in mind. The low weights are also really important in that they affect how combinations work. If you are in noncompliance with a very low weight and also a medium or high weight, depending on the combination of rules, that's going to affect safety in a different way. I know that's very abstract, but we'll get to more details in a moment. Essentially, we've put a lot of thought into all of these weights and all these different scales and all the different combinations and timelines, and that's really where the high-low combinations, duration, repetition is going to come in. And here's Sonia.
I have a few more things to add to this. So I think that we can easily justify those higher weights, right? We can easily know why pools must not be accessible to children. The question is more of those lower weighted WACs, right? How can we really justify having a point value put to those? And I am going to give you two different perspectives, and Tyler will give you one other. So did I mention I'm an analyst? Okay, so research and numbers are really important to me. They really tell me a lot. So one piece is we've gone and really looked at national research. National research really says that when children are cared for in environments that are safe, healthy, and developmentally appropriate, children experience fewer illnesses and injuries, and more likely to have better health care. They're more likely to have accurate referrals in timely manners. So when you look at it from the national research and all the studies that have been going on for probably really in depth for the last 10, 15 years, we're showing that even those smaller, less risky indicators are telling us that those providers are offering additional services and helping to limit injuries and illnesses. The other piece is the methodology about the weighting itself. And I've done a lot of extensive background work in this. And we already use a system called key indicators. And those key indicators could be something that's weighted pretty heavy, and it could be something such as easy as paperwork. But when you look at those, what those are telling us, statistically speaking, is if those are out of compliance, more than likely, there are other issues out of compliance in the environment. So having those to look at are important for us. In addition, if we have a whole lot of them, so if we have a bunch, so one minor noncompliance probably isn't going to affect children's health and safety. But let's say we've had 30. Okay, so what that's going to tell DEL is we need to focus our support to that provider. But if we don't have those weights, we're not going to know how to focus.
Backup coming.
Thank you. Okay. Whoa, louder. Hold it further away. So for me, those two perspectives are really critical. And there's one other perspective that Tyler will talk about.
Whoa, she's right. Unsurprisingly, the legal side of things catches my interest. And to use one example of low-weighted wax throughout this chapter is going to be forms and paperwork. We did an icebreaker earlier. You don't have to stand if you hate forms and paperwork. I assume that'll be everyone, including me, even as a lawyer. But here's why they're important. Whoa. All right. Records retention is critical for the law, and it's the only way to establish, basically, to recreate what happened or didn't happen at any given time. If you go to court, that's usually months or years down the road from whenever the event happened. And having records is the only way you can prove what somebody knew or should have known, when they knew it, what a provider or a licensor's practices usually are. It recreates the time period, and it's the only way, the most credible way that you can show, no, look, I actually did that. I took a record of it. And those are some examples of low-weighted wax you'll see throughout the chapter that down the road are critical. And that's my last perspective. For that, here's another way of looking at the different weights. This may be hard to read up here, but it basically goes from weight 1 to weight 8, coincidentally the same numbers as our new weighted whack. And what we're trying to capture is this progression and interconnectivity of the different rules, low versus high. And another way to think about it is the higher the weight, there's going to be a direct causal relationship in harm. The lower weight, there's going to be a more indirect causal relationship. And if you have the wax in front of you, well,
That was really strong.
Yep. All right. So we get to work through all these kinks, so you guys don't have to. So here we just have an example. Weight of number 1 is paint. You know, the paint and paint color doesn't generally every day impact the house that you build. But over time, it does. If you don't paint it, over time, you'll have some structural issues. Flooring, ventilation, moving up, plumbing, siding, foundation, electrical. As the weights get higher, the risk of danger gets higher. If you have exposed wires, that's a pretty serious violation if you're building a house. Weight 8, immediate direct danger. You need to stop whatever that is right away. So this is a good way to sort of think about this. Moving back to the low weights, 1, 2, and 3, down here in the green. To more explain the indirect causal relationship, we worked through an example. And that, if you have the WAC, 170, 300, 0016, and you don't necessarily need to read it, but it's about voluntary closures at a provider. And it says, if an early learning provider is responsible for notifying the department to program status changes, they essentially have to notify Dell. And so we took that WAC, and even though it's a low weight, we drew it out to its logical conclusion that if the department is not notified, then the staff changes won't be recorded. If the staff changes aren't recorded, then necessary staff requirements will not be monitored. This whole if-then analysis of indirect causal relationship. If the necessary staff requirements are not monitored, then people who should not and cannot legally work with children may be hired. If people who could not legally work with children are hired, then it will create a high probability that there is direct or potential harm to children. And that goes back all the way back to the low-weighted number 1 notification of changes in your program. These compound and snowball in a way that I think we can all work through and understand that maybe today this isn't an issue, but over time it could become very serious.
Okay. Any questions so far? Perfect. Okay. Oh, Man, I thought I was going to get away with it.
Almost.
Hi, I'm Kat McGonigal.
Hi, Kat.
For that example that you gave, you said if someone's closed, but they don't tell Dell they're closed, and you did this then if, then if, then if. But my thing is, if I am closed and I don't tell Dell, I'm not going to be hiring people.
Kat, do you mind if I read this real quick again?
Sure.
Okay. An early learning provider is responsible for notifying the department of changes to program status, including voluntary closure or new household members or staff. So it's not all inclusive of closure.
Okay. Okay.
If that answers your question.
It does. Thank
Okay,
you.
sure. Any others?
Question?
I actually have a question on your research. Does any of your research also show that early learning programs that are well-resourced have less of these violations?
In which way do you mean more
I mean, the
resourced?
staff is paid more, the facilities have more funding.
Yes. Yes, some research does say that. It also talks about how higher education actually helps to limit injury and illness to children, and so on and so forth. So, of course, the higher quality program that you can have, environment, staffing, and programming, the less injury you will have for children. Okay, I want to go over the weighted results real quick again. I think this was gone over once before, but I want to remind you. I am, like I said, the data nerd. I love the numbers. So when we went through this process of weighting the WAC and engaged, 14 focus groups and over 400 survey participants, this is what we came up with. This is our results. So we took the average medians, or distributed of the median, and we came up with these weights for those regulations. The little numbers at the top, if you can see, are how many regulations are in each weight. And thank you, PCG, I love this slide. At the bottom, we added our own little graphic to kind of show you where those are thinking of in the very low to very high, 1 to 8. These two sections right here are those WAC that were removed from the survey by the focus groups. And then you can see that we have really 3 through 8 in a very almost bell curve-ish way, which was very exciting for me. But what this also told us was the focus groups really did their job, right? They really did a great job of eliminating those WAC because we don't have really anything here in the 2 and the low range. We didn't have the surveys come back with the 1s and the 2s. So keeping that in mind, that's kind of where we're seeing the data move. Any questions about the data specifically? Great time to ask. Zane and Hallie were actively part of this and can help answer questions. No? Okay. Okay. So during the 14 focus groups, we asked the participants to remove any of. Let's see, I did it. We asked the focus group participants to remove those WACs that posed very little, if any, risk to children, so that overall the survey could be reduced. Already that survey took, anyone in here take the survey? Okay, it took an average of 2 to 4 hours to take that survey, so we really needed to limit that size down to a manageable amount of the survey. Focus groups did that by helping us eliminate those very, very low risk, if no risk, regulations.
So those 156
are all weighted 1 currently.
They haven't been removed?
The 95, they're not removed regulations. The weight, there's no weight to these 95.
Right.
And these regulations are automatically weighted number 1.
Oh, okay.
So they didn't go out to the survey.
Okay.
Is what happened there.
Oh, okay.
So we automatically weighted those.
It's the survey rather than the actual WAC itself. Or
Correct, correct.
Collection of the WACs.
Correct.
Got another question for you.
Megan.
Hi,
so
Megan.
Remind me how many surveys were returned or done?
Zane, I think you're probably better equipped at that one.
430 something?
I think it was 37.
How many originally went out?
Around 1,200.
And of those that were returned, how many were family child care providers or parents who take their children to family child care providers?
Okay, one of you get to take that
Holly.
one. Okay, Hallie actually has that. We can get that for you.
Pulling. While she's pulling that up, we'll take another question.
Sorry. So I just took statistics class. So I have a question.
Sure.
Whenever you're looking at your bell curve, what was your null hypothesis about getting from this information?
So realistically, the survey itself was not done with that. Well, Zane, go ahead and answer that one if you don't mind. My statistician over there.
With the distribution, the null hypothesis,
We were looking for a specific confidence level.
yes.
Yeah.
It was done with that in mind rather than a
What was that confidence level?
95%.
That's okay. That's all right. And again, if you would like to actually see that math, those numbers in the end, I think that they also still have a record of that as well. And if not, I do, so I can get that for you.
Going on the,
Any other
all the
cool,
information
nerdy
is also on
questions?
the Dell website as well for specifics.
It is true. It is true. The results are very lined out on the website. So, but while they're looking that up, any other, like I said, data nerdy kind of questions I can deflect to PCG? No? Okay. So if that's okay, since we're so time limited, there's one.
One more.
Say we'll move on.
So I know you don't have the weight zero on the WAC, so is that just like the ones that don't have the weight at all?
Correct, and those are,
considered weight
by
zero?
definition, those are the definitions and Dell directives, so what Dell must do.
Okay, thanks.
Those were automatically moved to zeros. Okay, all right. So I'm going to give you another, so again, being, like I said, the analyst, we kind of had that question. Have we ever really linked an action or an injury to a lower weighted WAC? So I did go back through some of our data, the data that I get to track on a daily basis, and I look for some examples. Here's an example of one. So, and I did change some of the information to protect some anonymity, okay? So the age of the child and the year and all that is all different, so you can't kind of track that down. But outdoor early environment must have access to outside shade areas. In 2015-ish, we had a report of a child who received first-degree burns from playing on the playground that had no shade. That was the documentation. So we can see how not having shade, specifically with a child who perhaps might have an allergy to sunscreen, could cause a direct harm to children. So with that example kind of in mind, that's a pretty simple example. Did we have any other I don't think we had more to share. I wanted to actually let you guys do a little bit of the thinking. So turn to somebody near you, a group or just another person, and answer one of these two questions. Kind of really think about it. What are some of the lower weighted WACs or regulations that could harm children directly or indirectly when violated over time? Or what are some of the lower weighted regulations that could harm children directly or indirectly that could be violated in combination with another lower weighted WAC? So if you guys could take just 5 minutes and kind of think those through, and then we'll see if anyone would like to volunteer and give us an example that they came up with. There we go. Okay, how we doing? I didn't want to take up too much more time. Tyler has a lot more to share with you about something else, so I want to pull everyone back in and see if there's anybody who had a thought and would like to volunteer a scenario, a potential, an if-then something. Anyone?
I know the year was 2015-ish. How many children were sunburned?
This was one in particular. So it really depends on how our data is reported. So this was most likely reported by a parent whose child had first and second degree burns. Mhm. So again, our data is only as good as what we get reported.
Right, exactly. And so the child had a sun hat and long sleeves on?
I don't have the details.
Good morning. We have some questions around how the weighted WAC works. We're excited about hearing about the process and the thought behind it. And it's in our current system, we have FLCAs or compliance agreements, right? And so if you have one violation, it often lists 4 different WACs that you are not in compliance with. So we want to know in the weighted system, is it the one issue that the weight carried points that you will accrue, or is it every related WAC that you will accrue points for? Candy might have more to add to that.
Do you have more to add to that? Well, I do kind of have an answer, but it's, once again, almost a deflection. I believe next time we're actually going to be presenting on that. So specifically how those weights accrue, are assessed, and are combined together. So, but that would be the next one.
So what we were talking about was like if you violated WAC 1750, but you had 3 subcategories underneath, would you, like you violated A, B, and D, how would that count against you?
Okay, so as you'll notice in your negotiated notebooks, some sections have a weight attached, some subsections have a weight attached. So as we move forward with these weights, we're also going to be moving forward with a different approach on how to address these. That will also be addressed. Individual findings will have to be pretty specific because they will have different weights, right? So we can't lump them all together because they carry a different risk value from here on out. So it's going to be much more transparent, much more clear to licensors and providers. But again, I believe that's something that we're going to talk about next time we get together. Or do you want to say something else?
So as you remember, we negotiate per content area. So what Mary Keller is asking about, it's about how enforcement will work or how oversight of the compliance will work. And it's an admin section of the WACs, which we will negotiate in August. If you would like to request this presentation to be sooner, we definitely can, let's say, present it in July and discuss it in July, so you will have a full overview before August. Yeah, we're negotiating the weights, but the enforcement process, it's what you're asking about, how the WACs will be enforced or how compliance will be overseen. These regulations live in administrative section.
So I'd like to make that request that we do it sooner so that we can consider those weights.
Okay, we can definitely do it in July, so you will have full overview before August.
Well, with those final questions, were there any other scenarios anyone wanted to share, anything they talked about? If not, I'll pass it back off to Tyler. Okay, here you go.
Okay, unless you have any more questions about the weighted WAC specifically, we'll move on to our first chunk of the rules to negotiate, which everyone's excited about, I'm sure. Okay, 1 second. So we need, do I just keep clicking through? I'm going on to the intent and authority. Okay, 1 second, we'll get the next deck of PowerPoint working.
Check, check. Check, 2, 3, 4. Handheld mic, check, check, check. Okay, check.
All right, we have about 2 minutes, so if you can wrap up, I'll be starting in 2 minutes. All right, if everybody can come take their seats again. Sorry to rush you. I'm going to have to work through this whole chunk of sections in about 15 minutes. And so I'll go ahead and get started. I apologize to the people in the back because I'm standing right in their way of the presentation, but they're my colleagues, so they're going to have to deal with it. Hopefully all of you on the sides can see this. And we'll go from here. So intent and authority is the first sort of area, the first chunk of these new sections that we're going to go through. And I'm going to give you just a brief overview of which sections they are, what they are, and so you have a little more background about how we're breaking these up. So again, my name is Tyler Farmer, work for Dell in the licensing, and excited to talk to you about intent and authority. So why are we here? We, as Dell, actually only exist because the legislature created us back in 2006. And according to their own language, this is why we exist. The legislature finds, again, I apologize for reading off the slide. I hate this, but this is really important legal language. The legislature finds that the early years of a child's life are critical to the child's healthy brain development, and that the quality of caregiving during the early years can significantly impact the child's intellectual, social, and emotional development. And that's from the Revised Code of Washington. Site is right there. And again, according to the legislature, why we exist, one purpose of establishing Dell was to, quote, safeguard and promote the health, safety, and well-being of children receiving child care and early learning assistance. That's why we exist, that's why we come to work every day, and that's what we do when we write these laws. We know this going into it. That's what we keep at the forefront. So here's my fun little flow chart of the law. You'll probably see this a few times. I changed the language here a little bit just so you can more fully appreciate the law. The RCW creates the agency and it grants us authority. We can only do what they say we can do. And that provides us general legal guidance. The WAC is where we work with you. We work with the industry to develop an expertise in child care and early learning. We're the only agency that is capable of doing this, and the legislature created us to do this, to become the experts in this field by learning from you guys. That's how we together draft the rules for the industry. And then the policies and procedures are our own internal approach to how we do our job. So this is where we are today. We're writing the rules for the industry in the WAC. This is why your input and your feedback and all those hours on the survey are so important. The Early Start Act is why we're doing the standards alignment. It mandated that Dell update the child care licensing rules so that the early learning system has a unified set of foundational health, safety, and child development regulations. They need to be easy to understand and align with other requirements by providers in the field. This again is taken straight from the RCW and gives us authority and tells us what we're supposed to do. So we took this language from our bosses over in the Dome, and to accomplish these goals, Dell is taking this transparent, methodical, and inclusive approach to this legislatively mandated process. You'll see this slide again. If you didn't read it now, you can read it later. I'm going to abbreviate this. It's a long slide, but essentially not only do we take our direction from the state legislature, but the federal government too. They enact quite a few laws that we have to make sure we're in compliance with. Very importantly for our work today is the Child Care and Development Block Grant Act of 2014. Most of what this did is it updated federal child care law and it placed an emphasis on the quality of care. I'm sure most of you are in fact more familiar with that than I am. There are new requirements that are coming straight from the federal government, and these requirements are non-negotiable. We have to do what they say. We have to write them in our rules. And we'll talk about which rules these are and move forward from there. But we essentially can rely on caring for our children basics for the minimum standards for health and safety. These regulations, and I'll, again, because it's quoted here, lead agencies for the federal projects, or the federal monies, really, which is us, lead agencies are encouraged to go beyond the baseline standards to develop a comprehensive and robust set of health and safety standards that cover additional areas related to program design, caregiver safety, and child developmental needs using the full Caring for Our Children guidelines. So again, this is coming straight from Congress that's saying, this is what you can do, minimum health and safety standards, but you are really encouraged to go above and beyond. Think about these rules, think about quality, child care, and education, and enact your own laws and rules that really accomplish these goals. And again, this is what Dell has done. Taking these proposed regulations, and we're using our new chapter of WAC to implement these federal laws. All right, enough of the boring legal overview. Intent and authority, this is what this bucket is. It's a collection of 8 different sections. And I'm going to use some very specific language just to explain to people when we're talking about WAC or RCW. This first number, this is called the title. This is the chapter, and this is the section. Anything smaller than this is the subsection. So I'm very intentionally using title, chapter, section. The intent and authority chunk, which is our random collection of these 8 sections, is just what we're referring to. So these 8 sections are intent and authority, which is where this chunk gets its name from. The definition section, which I'll talk about more later, but very, very important. License required, licensee absences, inactive status, and program changes, not just inactive status for 0016. Unlicensed programs, certified and exempt programs, and non-discrimination. These are all 8 sections that we are coining the intent and authority chunk. And I'll walk through these one by one just to flesh them out a little bit more. I don't have too much time before the next presentation, but just give you an overview. We went over this before, why weighted WACs are important. Keep in mind the unweighted versus the weighted, and keep in mind the lower weights versus the higher weights. I won't go over that again. Again, the house. All weights are important because there's a lot of different components to build a sound, safe house, even from the lowly paint on the outside, maybe paint color doesn't matter, but up to the very direct, dangerous rules. All of these matter, and all of these are needed to build a safe house. So speaking of weights, I did a little breakdown here of what weights are used in which section. In intent and authority, there are no weights. In the definition, there are no weights. In license required, there are no weights. Weights only start in the licensee absence, and it's broken up among either there's no weights, which is the NA for not applicable, or they're weighted at 4 and 5. So kind of getting a little more serious up there on the scale. Inactive status, no weights or weighted at a 1. Unlicensed programs, no weights or weighted at a 1. exempt program, no weights, and non-discrimination, weights of 5. So that's going to be the highest weighted WAC that we're dealing with, getting up towards the higher end of the serious direct and indirect harm. Starting with intent and authority, again, I don't want to read from the slide, but basically this section describes why we exist. It's from the legislature that created us. It says, create a single set of licensing standards, and it reiterates our own commitment to, and these are our words because this is our WAC, our commitment to promote the health, safety, and well-being of children, expand access and improve the outcomes for children, get kids ready for kindergarten, and recognize the vital role of parents, you guys. These are all our guiding principles. So not only do we have the principles that the legislature created us with the intent, but these are our own that we carry forward into our WACs. And we have to monitor programs for compliance. That's our duty. Definitions. As a lawyer, this is my favorite section because anytime you read a section and you think you understand it, or maybe there's a term of art or a phrase that you're not that familiar with, you always should go back to the definition section. This is what defines the terms, phrases, and the various lingo that we use. So if you're unclear about something, a phrase, a term, we have a pretty long definition section. So try and look stuff up through there, and it'll give you a fuller idea of what we're really saying. And these are important because these are legally binding. These are not part of negotiation, which is important. However, we are listening to your feedback. If a definition is unclear, let us know. There's a public comments process. There's this NRM process. Definitions are critical, so we want to make sure we get them right. We want to make sure you understand what we're saying. License required is pretty forward. You must have a license in the state of Washington to provide childcare. No insider licensing, and I use that phrase just to say we at Dell, if we have a hand in picking and choosing who gets licensed, we can't start our own programs. There's a law against us having essentially an inside track to get our own programs licensed. That's verboten by our own rules. Family home child care needs a license, and there are exempt programs, Department of Defense, the Federal Department of Defense, Indian tribes, etc. Licensee absence, what to do if the licensee is going to be gone or if the leadership at a center is going to be gone. The different types of absences that qualify, what you must put in a notice to the department if there is going to be an absence, and how to deal with non-compliance during an absence. Inactive status, this one, again, what to do if you're going to be inactive for 14 or more days. You can't do an inactive status within your first initial licensing period. Dell may inspect the sites. The provider must notify Dell of status changes and program changes that we talked about earlier. It outlines a list of our own responsibilities, and I really want to key in on that. We've listed our own responsibilities as an agreement with you. We're saying this is what we have to do. These are the duties that we have to do, and we have to fulfill them. If we don't, it's your job and your responsibility to call us on it because we have our own tasks and our own duties that we need to fulfill to make sure this works. So these are very important. And then it lists the steps to reopen after an inactive status period. Unlicensed programs, flip side of there must be licensed programs. We regulate unlicensed childcare. We go through a certain number of enforcement actions, and we essentially are in charge of making sure that there is not unlicensed childcare. That's our enforcement responsibility. Yes? Well, there are probably a lot of different answers to that. In this section, we don't have a separate definition. Generally, as an attorney, I treat unlawful versus illegal in different ways. If it is illegal, I consider that as a criminal act. And because this is a regulatory chapter that is not criminal, we have enforcement mechanisms to make sure unlawful programs no longer are unlawful. But with a question like that may be loaded based on your understanding and your usage of illegal versus non-illegal. So I'm going to be really hesitant about that. And again, really focus on our own definitions. We're talking about unlicensed programs are unlawful to operate in the state of Washington. Correct.
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Oh, right.
My question is illegal, unlawful is equivalent to unlicensed, and your answer was affirmative.
Correct. Okay. It is unlawful to operate an unlicensed program in this state. Did we have a question? Yeah. Here you go.
I'm a little bit confused about whether or not definitions are negotiable, because I thought we had decided last time that they were not, but we got an email saying that they are as long as they are in the WAC.
Was that from Dell? Yes. Well, they're not intended to be part of the. Oh, Luba will respond.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't know for sure what the email you're referring to. Definitions, as we discussed in Renton, we're not negotiating them. What we're open to hear public comments about negotiations, as well as your feedback about definitions. So we will consider it, and as Tyler been saying, it's important for us to make sure that we have a shared understanding about definitions per se, because it's a core of the rules. So that's why we are open to consider if you have any suggestions how to make it better.
And part of that answer is we have part of this definition chapter. Certain definitions have been made permanent and finalized already. And those are, I believe, indicated in your in all your materials. Moving on to section 0025, certified and exempt programs. This lists the different types of programs you can run that are exempt from this licensing chapter, although you can voluntarily opt in to being licensed by this chapter as if you were not exempt. Again, we repeat the no insider licensing for childcare and Dell workers. And the last section, non-discrimination. If you remember, this is the highest weighted whack of the intent and authority bucket. And what we do here is we make a lot of federal law and state law a lot more apparent concerning discrimination. I don't know if a lot of people know, but in Washington we have a lot stronger non-discrimination laws than federally, which personally I think is a good thing. And we really call those out here. We say places of public accommodation, which childcare is, cannot discriminate based on constitutionally protected classes, race, creed, color, national origin, marital status, gender, sexual orientation, class, age, religion, or disability. And in this section, we require a non-discrimination policy if you run a childcare program. And we say that you must comply with the Washington Law Against Discrimination and also the American with Disabilities Act. Us saying this doesn't make it true. This is true regardless of if we say it. We put it in our WAC to make sure we have somewhere to point to it. But the American with Disabilities Act passed in 1990, and I think took effect in 1992, and it's always been true. The same thing with the Washington Law Against Discrimination. Places of public accommodation have always had to comply with this. We're just bringing that to the forefront to bring our rules forward and say, make sure we're all on the same page. And that is it. Oh, not yet. These are the main sources we relied on for this bucket. American with Disabilities Act, Caring for Our Children. This chapter of the RCW about ethics in public service, that's where it says no insider licensing. Department of Early Learning, we have a whole chapter that defines us by the legislature. Child Care and Development Block Grant Act, that's the federal government's act. Child Care Development Fund, that's the federal government's fund that goes towards child care. The Early Start Act, IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Act, again, that's another federal act that we have to comply with, and the Washington Law Against Discrimination. All of these guided how we wrote the intent and authority section. All right, questions? We had a question, which was, what kind of questions can you ask? You can ask whatever you want. I will answer the ones that are within the scope of the intent and authority bucket.
I have a question to all of you. Have you received the matrix with all of the WACs and the resources linked to each WAC for intent and authority and children? Okay, so you do have direct access to the resources. Great, thank you.
And I'll go back just to a little overview of the sections that we're talking about. And just to let you know, I have about, I'm actually over time. Child outcomes will be next, so I'll take just a couple of questions.
What are places of public accommodation?
Great question. What's relevant is child care centers and family home providers are places of public accommodation. That phrase, again using a term of art, is a phrase defined by the federal government in the Americans with Disabilities Act that says who must comply with the American with Disabilities Act. It is also the same phrase that our state government and Supreme Court has adopted to say who must comply with the Washington Law Against Discrimination Act. So there's a whole bunch of entities that are public places of public accommodation, but without getting outside the scope of today, what we're doing here, what's relevant is that childcare, all childcare for the most part, is a place of public accommodation. There are exemptions to this, and I am a lawyer. I am not your lawyer. I'm nobody's lawyer here. I cannot give legal advice not only to you, but also not to Dell. And if you have specific questions, which was a great question, essentially asking about who is exempt or may be exempt, that's when I would advise you to, if you work with a lawyer, ask them. They're going to tell you how it applies to you and your program. And again, that's not a satisfying answer, but it's a lawyerly answer that I have to give. I believe Debbie is up next with child outcomes. Were there any other questions? No? Okay, well that's it for me today. Thank you very much. I'll be around all weekend. If you have questions, I'm happy to give you dodgy legal answers such as that.
We're going to resituate here just a little bit so I'm not in the middle. There we go. Thank you. It's like who's hiding behind the curtain? I tried to get Sonia to crawl underneath there, but she just would have nothing of that. My name is Debbie O'Neill, and I want to echo, and I feel really bad because I'm standing in your way. Sure. Click and it'll go. I love that. I want to echo something that Lori shared earlier, and that is just to thank you for your sacrifice of time, your energy. The sitting can get tiring, just what that needs to do for your brains, and just really encourage you to hang in there with us. Appreciate the commitment for your summer. I think summer's going to fly by, but just I want to acknowledge that because it's a lot of time and energy, and especially time away from your family. So I hope you find something fun to do while you're here in Yakima. So thank you. I have the opportunity to share with you about child outcomes, and I love children, and I love talking about wonderful outcomes for kids. And so we're just going to do a quick overview, and so if I'm left clicking, it will go forward, right? Left. Thank you. So Tyler talked about this just a little bit, about the Early Start Act and what that mandated the department to do. There are many different levels and pieces to the Early Start Act, but we're going to talk about just the unified system and the early learning system that it required us to do, which has been quite the journey. And if you get a chance when you're in line for lunch to look at the poster over there, really gives you a timeline of from where we came. So it's interesting for me. I've been involved with the standards writing for quite a while, I think a year and a half or something. So when I look at the beginning stages and where we are, we've made some significant changes. So really to talk about that unified set of health and safety and child development in our regulations today. And again, not to reiterate everything that Tyler has said, but really the source is the child care Child Care and Development Block Grant of 2014, and that emphasis on quality care and what we needed to derive from that as a state of Washington and our system itself. And again, also really being specific about relying on Caring for Our Children, and all of you are very aware of that. That really thick book is the one, Caring for Our Children, is what I'm referring to, and it has some amazing resources in there. So we were able to use that as our standard as well. And an encouragement beyond that, yes, you can use that as a standard, but to create the robust system, to really take a look at going above and beyond how we can develop those with keeping in mind the outcomes for children and families. So that's an exciting part of what we're doing. Just a quick overview. The child outcomes, just so that you know, there was not a current specific standard in our WAC in regards to what kind of very specific outcomes do we want for children, and how can we work together as an agency with providers and parents to really impact those outcomes for kids. And so that's exciting. It's a brand new WAC. So 2 core provisions within this WAC is developmental screening and school readiness. So again, both of those were not in any current standard that we had. And again, the Child Care and Development Block Grant required the distribution of information on developmental screening. So you will see that as something that was a result of those regulations. And the department goal, you've heard this probably many times, just that our goal as an agency is 90% of children ready for school. And that's by 2020. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what that might mean for all of us today. One of the things that we kept in mind, and I think you've heard a variety of ways of what has motivated the writing of the WAC and the proposed standards as you see them today, is the role of providers. And I really see the role of providers as very key and pivotal partners to the outcomes for kids. And looking at your day-to-day contact with kids and with families and with parents, you are in a very unique situation of impacting kids. Those relationships are ones that no one else can have, and how you can have those areas of communication, giving resources, educating them, and really partnering with them for the best outcome for kids. So that was also part of the motivation for the writing of this particular WAC. And then we're going to review the purposes and resources and the plan. So looking at the WAC and how we move forward from there, it's new. So how do we get there? How do we make that happen? We're going to talk a little bit about that. And then just the goals that we have for great child outcomes. And this is just a recap. You all have the WAC in your notebooks. But the first one, developmental screening and communication to parents or guardians, is really informing parents. And a lot of your parents maybe already know this, but you may have parents that do not know about developmental screening and how we can intervene and give them that information and make sure that parents have that. In addition, the sharing of the resources. So what's happening in your local community? What entities are there? What organizations can assist you with that developmental screening and those information sources that you can give to parents? The next one is about school readiness. And then 1 time per year, and again, I'm recapping, so the verbatim writing is in your notebooks. 1 time per year for the providers to give families school readiness materials. We're going to talk about some different areas that you can find that as well, so just to make sure you have the resources. And those materials, equivalent to what OSPI or the department may be able to give you at this point, and that they're already online. So we're going to talk about those just a little bit, but there are additional things that we want to make sure that you're aware of today. So on developmental screening and communication to parents, again, the regulations require distribution of information on developmental screening. So that was a main source of our writing to make sure that we wrote that into our rule, and then stressing that we educate parents, make sure they know about those milestones, what they can expect or hope to see with their children. And if those things are not there in those critical milestones, how do you get parents, one, informed, and get them the referrals and resources that they really need? One of the remarkable things that Caring for Our Children cites is that 70% of children with developmental disabilities are not identified until school entry. That's a pretty high number. And most of us in this room certainly know that if they start behind in kindergarten, it's very difficult for children to get caught up. So how we can maybe close that gap And I think about, in Washington State, we have in care, in licensed care, about 165,000 children. And so when you think about the 70%, right now, research is showing 1 in 8 children are diagnosed with a developmental disability. So how can we close that gap, making sure children get services and they get what they need to be successful? You also have as a source in your notebooks the Thrive report. Luba talked earlier about the community feedback, really listening to what's going to work in each community, making sure there's awareness with families, how to use the information, and options to opt out of screening. Screening is not required, but the information and education is something that we do need to give to parents. And then a little bit about this dissemination. I'm going to talk about it a little bit later, about the resources that the agency has online, but also I want to share just some exciting news with some of the required CCDF trainings that are going to be happening and presented to all of you. The developmental screening at the Early Start Act Technical Assistance Team, which is working very hard in regards to training for our staff as well. But one of the opportunities we had is to work with our professional development team and creating some of those provider trainings. And so the developmental screening is nearly done, but it's pretty exciting. It has some great resources of how to have the conversations with parents. That's not an easy conversation to have with parents about their children, especially if they're not seeing some of those milestones that maybe you think are important. So how to monitor those and how to tell families and then how to share tools. So that future training will be out, and we're excited to see that come out. So really the early detection and intervention can change that child's learning trajectory. Again, 70% of children with disabilities are not identified until school entry. And the next section that really talks about the school readiness, not only is it Dell's goal to have children ready, 90% of children ready for kindergarten, but also it's a very high focus for the Early Start Act as well, is how to get children in a better place. In fall of 2015, we knew that about 44% of Washington children were ready for school. So something that we're doing, all of us, may not be successful for children. And so how do we figure out how to do things different to make sure kids have a better shot? Again, one time a year to talk to your parents about kindergarten transition and school transition. And again, the source of the Washington Early Learning Guidelines and how that informed part of this writing as well. That perspective is important, and sometimes school transition and those conversations can happen before kindergarten, but also all throughout the school years, and how children can be impacted in different ways. So there may be diagnosis or things that come up later in a child's life as well. And again, Dell will be preparing and disseminating resource materials. So children ready for success in school has been our goal, will continue to be our goal, and by 2020, I'm hoping we have a better number than 44%. So one of the resources that I referred to earlier about the kindergarten readiness, if you go on to, I'm just gonna ask a quick show of hands, has anybody gone to the kindergarten readiness page that Dell has? Okay, just a few. Great, I'm glad I'm bringing that up. So I want to encourage you to get on that page. It is amazing to me how many resources were there. There's some really great links, and we're gonna walk through a little bit of this. But one of the quotes that is on that page I wanted to share with you, and we believe the kindergarten readiness equation is ready children plus ready schools, ready parents and families, ready communities, and how everyone needs to work together to make sure children are prepared and they're successful. So that's pretty exciting to look at. The links that are on here, I just want to run through really quickly, a little more information about WA Kids, kindergarten tips, link to local school districts, so you can click on the link and it has all of the state of Washington districts. So it's a pretty handy way to get information that you need. And one of my favorites was the kindergarten readiness checklist, and that was developed from the perspective of a child. And so some of the questions on there about, I'm excited for kindergarten because, or I know all about kindergarten because I know where my bus stop is. I know what my teacher looks like. I know where my classroom is. I have friends. So it really asks those questions really from the basis of being a child and really talking about the parent connection, because some of the questions that you can go through are about, I know my parents are excited about me going to school because. And there's a great brochure that you can get to with that, so it has some really good information. Also, there are the Getting School Ready, which is from Foundation for Early Learning. Let's talk about it. Your child's education from OSPI. This one has some really great cultural conversations that you can have, and talking with parents about school and maybe the differences of what happens at home is very different than what I see at school, and how to have those good conversations with parents. And then the OSPI information as well, with a link to their information. Child outcomes, just to review. Informing parents, they need to know. And sometimes parents are so busy and working that they can't get to the information or research those things, and how important that is that they get that information for their child. Really hearing about the importance of early intervention and what happens with children when they don't have that opportunity to have services when they need services to be successful, and making them ready for school. Again, our goal, 90% by 2020, hoping we have an improvement from our 44% that was back in 2015. The family engagement piece, how important it is to partner with them. And then again, I want to reiterate the importance of providers, the unique position that providers are in to have the conversations, to understand the relationships, and really know the child to be able to make recommendations and have some sometimes very difficult conversations with parents about their child, because most parents don't want to think that their child's not on target or has not reached a milestone. So really having that very unique role with parents. And then again, just the Dell OSPI resources and training. We're excited about the training coming out. I think that's a critical piece of making sure the resources are there, training is there, so that you understand what needs to happen for kids. And I think, see, all the kids are just super happy there, right? Okay, I don't know when lunch is going to be ready.
It's almost ready, if you have questions.
Okay, a couple questions before we all bombard the lunch table.
I know that as a provider for years, and Dell has asked a question how they might promote licensed child care. And I know with a focus group that I was in many years ago, we suggested a PSA. And so I think some kind of a PSA about this, about children's outcomes and how child care and early learning connects with that, so that that will validate us as early learning providers in our different, family child care versus center versus ECAP, and what that looks like, so that Dell is not only mandating us to do these things, but they are also educating the parents so that we get validation.
That's a great point. I actually, and I haven't seen it for a while, probably 8 years ago, there were several commercials about how to teach children through, and it was actually a dad riding on a bus with a child, and really talked about how to educate and talk through everyday kind of things about numbers and colors and differences and what things look like. And so I think media, especially in our days now, is a great way to reach people and to educate. So it's a great suggestion. Other questions? Comments? Everybody's ready for lunch. Yes.
In caring for our children, statistics of the 70%, do you know how many of those were in formal care or early learning programs and how many were not?
I do not, but we can certainly check into that. Great question.
Okay, with this, lunch is about to be served. We will start actually negotiations on those two particular content areas, intent and authority, and hopefully get to children outcomes after lunch. Right now it's a group time and lunch time. Please enjoy yourself and see you at 1.